On my wedding day, the motorcade got into an accident. He carried his childhood friend, whose hand was merely scraped, into the ambulance, leaving me bleeding in my wedding dress by the side of the road. 3 days later, he came to the hospital looking for his bride. The doctor sneered at him. Before he left, the doctor remarked that it would have been fitting to turn this wedding into a funeral. When the bridal limousine crashed into the highway guardrail, I was still wearing my wedding dress. Shattered glass covered the floor. The front of the limo looked as if it had been crushed by a giant fist. My calf was pinned against the edge of the seat, and the hem of my white dress was soaked in blood. The driver slumped over the steering wheel, calling for help. My bridesmaid, Mia, turned deathly pale. She lunged forward to hold me, begging me not to move because my leg was bleeding. I looked down. Blood was seeping through the tulle skirt, dripping steadily onto the floor mats. Julian rushed out of the vehicle behind us. I thought he would come to pull me out first. After all, today was our wedding day. We had been together for 6 years, from college to our careers, from renting apartments to buying a condo in Seattle, from his mother initially despising my working-class background to him finally nodding and saying we could just make do with a simple wedding. I thought, at the very least, he would remember that I was his bride in a moment like this. But he ran right past me. He sprinted toward another car. Summer was sitting in the passenger seat. The skin on her hand was slightly scraped. Her eyes were red. Leaning against the car door, her voice trembled as she told Julian she was scared and her chest was hurting. Julian scooped her up into his arms, comforting her and telling her not to be afraid. Mia froze. She screamed at him, yelling that I was still in the limo and my leg was bleeding. Julian paused for a second. He looked back at me. That glance was so brief it felt like a passing thought. He told Mia to help me out first, and that another ambulance was coming. He justified himself by saying Summer had a heart condition and could not be subjected to stress. I gripped the car door, my knuckles turning white. Mia was so furious her voice cracked, screaming that Summer only had a scratch while I was pinned in the wreckage. Summer, resting in Julian's arms, coughed lightly and let a tear fall, asking if she was delaying us and saying I would blame her. Julian frowned, telling her to stop talking. The first ambulance arrived. The paramedics brought out a stretcher, and Julian carried Summer straight into the back of it. I sat in the ruined bridal limo. The wind blew in, making me shiver uncontrollably. I called his name. Julian stopped at the ambulance doors. I asked him if he was sure he wanted to take her first. He looked at me with impatience, telling me not to be jealous at a time like this because Summer was unstable, while I had Mia and the driver with me. I smiled. My lips were dry, and smiling actually hurt. I told him I was bleeding. I know, he said, telling me to just be strong. Those words crushed the last bit of my physical pain into pure, freezing numbness. The ambulance doors closed. The red and blue lights flashed before my eyes like some absurd celebration. Mia cursed under her breath and crouched down to apply pressure to my wound, begging me to hold on because she had already called 911 again. I did not look in the direction Julian had left. I took off my wedding ring. Julian had picked it out himself, and the inside of the band was engraved with our initials. On the day he proposed, he promised he would never let me face anything alone again. Now, the ring was smeared with my blood. I pressed it into Mia's palm, asking her to keep it safe. Her eyes welled with tears as she told me to stop talking and focus on stopping the bleeding. I stared at the ring. I was going to give it back to him. It took over 10 minutes for the second ambulance to arrive. When I was loaded onto the stretcher, the train of my wedding dress dragged on the asphalt, leaving a long red trail of blood. Relatives standing nearby whispered among themselves. Someone said the bride was so unlucky to see blood on her wedding day. Another defended Julian, saying he had no choice because Summer had been frail since childhood. Someone else muttered that I usually seemed reasonable and hoped I would not throw a fit over Summer today. I closed my eyes, memorizing every single word. By the time we reached Seattle General Hospital, I was shivering violently. A nurse cut away the bottom of my wedding dress. Dr. Miller examined the wound and immediately ordered stitches and a scan. When the nurse asked for family members, Mia rushed up, stating she was my friend. The nurse asked where the groom was. Mia gritted her teeth and said he went with someone else. Dr. Miller glanced at me but asked no further questions, focusing on treating my leg. As the needle pierced my skin, the pain made my fingers tremble. Mia held my hand, telling me she had called my mom and that she was on her way. I nodded. My phone kept buzzing on the bedside table. The wedding group chat on iMessage was flooded with notifications. Julian's mother, Evelyn, sent a voice memo. Her high-pitched voice echoed in the room, telling everyone not to panic and that the wedding was simply on pause. She said Summer had been terribly frightened, and Julian was with her for a checkup, adding that I was fine, just emotional because it was my wedding day, and asking everyone to be understanding. I stared at the transcript of that message, suddenly finding it hilarious. My leg required 7 stitches. My lower back was severely bruised. My head needed observation because I had slammed it against the window. But according to Evelyn, I was just being emotional. I did not reply. I told Mia to screenshot and save every single message in those group chats. Mia cursed the entire family while taking the screenshots. I told her to save her breath and just keep the evidence. She paused, and I added that we would need it later. That night, my mother, Laura, arrived at the ER. She was still wearing the apron from her diner, her hands dusted with flour that she could not wash off in time. The moment she walked in and saw the thick bandages on my leg, tears streamed down her face. She asked if it hurt. I had not cried yet, but her question made my eyes burn. Still, I refused to let the tears fall. I looked at her and said, "Mom, I am not getting married." My mother froze. She looked at me, then at the shredded remains of my wedding dress in the plastic bag. Suddenly, she reached out and stroked my hair. "Okay, Chloe," she said. "No marriage." There was no persuasion, no questioning, no lecturing about how far the wedding preparations had already gone. Just a simple agreement. In that moment, I wanted to cry more than I did at the crash site. Julian did not show up that night. He sent a text saying Summer was still under observation, noting that I had Mia and my mom with me, and promising to visit me the next morning. He added that I should not make a scene about the wedding because his mother was already exhausted. I stared at the message for a long time before handing my phone to Mia to screenshot. Mia gritted her teeth and did as asked. Then, I opened my banking app. I canceled the $800 monthly automatic transfer I had set up to help pay off Julian's mother's medical debt. I went to the vendor payment portal and halted the final payments for the wedding. Finally, I changed Julian's contact name on my phone to pending settlement. After doing all this, I leaned back against the pillows. Outside the window, the emergency room lights flashed. I heard another ambulance pull up. This hospital saw people arrive and leave every single day. And I, on my wedding day, finally woke up from 6 years of self-deception. At 3 a.m., a nurse came in with my discharge papers. In the U.S., hospitals don't keep you overnight for a few stitches and a mild concussion. Before I left, Dr. Miller handed me my medical records and discharge instructions, telling me to keep the wound dry and rest my back. He looked at my plain jacket, then at the torn wedding dress in the plastic bag. He suddenly asked if I still wanted that wedding. I shook my head and said no. He nodded, his tone completely calm, saying that was good, and that a person must first live for themselves. Julian finally came looking for me at the hospital on the 3rd day. By then, I had been recovering at my mother's house for 72 hours. Mia later told me that when he walked into the ER asking for me, he was still wearing his suit jacket from the wedding day. He froze when a nurse told him I had long been discharged. Julian frowned, demanding to know who authorized it. Dr. Miller happened to walk out of his office. He glanced at Julian and said I had consented to it myself. When Julian angrily declared he was my fiancé, Dr. Miller simply sneered. He pointed out that I had been brought in wearing a wedding dress with a leg needing 7 stitches, yet the person who signed my paperwork was my bridesmaid, while Julian carried another woman in and signed as her family. Now, 3 days later, you're finally asking where your bride is, Dr. Miller said. Julian argued Summer's situation was special. Dr. Miller delivered the parting blow, saying it would be perfectly fine to turn this wedding into a funeral instead. When Dr. Miller clarified that the only thing being buried was the wedding, Julian was left speechless. When Mia recounted this to me, I was sitting in the back room of my mother's diner, getting my bandages changed. Mia mimicked Dr. Miller's tone perfectly. My mom handed me a bowl of soup, praising the doctor. I smiled just as my phone rang. It was Julian. I ignored it. When he called for the 3rd time, I finally answered. His voice was suppressing anger as he demanded to know why I left without telling him. I looked at the gauze on my leg and simply said he had been busy. He stayed silent for 2 seconds before acknowledging I was wronged on the wedding day, but insisted Summer's chest pain was a real scare due to a childhood accident. I asked him if my bleeding did not count as an emergency. Julian let out an exasperated breath, claiming I was misinterpreting things and telling me not to compare myself to her. I asked who I should compare myself to. Then, he did not answer. Through the receiver, I heard a soft female voice telling Julian not to argue with me and claiming everything was her fault. Summer's voice was incredibly gentle, yet it pierced like a needle. Julian immediately softened his tone, telling her to lie back down. I put the phone on speaker. Hearing this, Mia's face darkened with rage. I asked Julian where he was. He paused before admitting he was at the hospital keeping Summer company because she still needed observation. I laughed out loud. A scraped hand required 3 days of observation, while I came home after getting 7 stitches. How wonderful. Julian's tone turned cold, telling me to stop being sarcastic, noting the wedding was already a mess and asking me to come back so we could sort out the aftermath. I told him I would handle the aftermath. When he asked what I meant, I picked up the manila folder from the table. It contained my medical records, payment receipts, venue contracts, limo contracts, and the ring Mia had saved for me. I told him it meant the wedding was canceled, the engagement was off, and we were going to clear the debts for the condo, the wedding expenses, his family's loans, and the medical debt payments I gave his mother, item by item. The line went dead silent for a few seconds. Then Julian scoffed as if he had heard a joke, asking if I was done throwing a tantrum. I was not angry. When a person is completely emotionally dead, the anger fades. I told him this was not a tantrum, it was a notification. He asked if it was just because he took Summer to the hospital first. I looked at the calendar on the wall and told him it was because for the past 6 years, he had forced me to yield to her every single time. His breathing grew heavier as he argued Summer had no family left and only had us. I reminded him that my father died when I was young, and my mother raised me alone by running a diner. I did not have much family either, but I never used that to emotionally blackmail anyone. Julian muttered that I used to be different. I laughed and agreed, saying I used to be entirely too easy to manipulate. After that, total silence fell on his end. I continued, stating that by 6 p.m. today, I would send him an itemized invoice. The ring would be mailed back. The condo was purchased with my down payment and my remodeling funds, so he and his mother had 3 days to pack their things and leave. Julian finally panicked, yelling that the condo was supposed to be our marital home. I told him it wasn't anymore and hung up. Mia slammed the table in triumph, declaring it was about time. My mother stayed quiet. She just pushed the bowl of soup closer to me, telling me to eat because I would need my strength to collect my debts. I looked down and took a sip, the steam warming my face. I suddenly remembered the day I bought the condo 3 years ago. Julian had claimed money was tight and promised to contribute later. His mother had argued that women shouldn't be so calculating before marriage, and that putting both names on the deed was what made them a real family. I refused. Evelyn gave me a sour face for half a month. Later, she changed her tactics. She had me pay for the renovations, the furniture, and Julian's credit card debt, claiming we were all family. I kept track of every penny. Back then, I kept the receipts just to manage our household budget. Now, those receipts would prove to them that I was never the gold digger they painted me out to be. That afternoon, I sent Julian the itemized invoice. Item 1, condo down payment $120,000, paid entirely from my personal account. Item 2, remodeling and furniture, $35,000. Item 3, wedding venue deposit, florist, limos, and photography, totaling $30,000. Item 4, 2 years of medical bills and insurance premiums paid for his mother, $18,000. Item 5, personal injury compensation from the car crash caused by an unauthorized route change, to be calculated later following the police report. After I sent the message, Julian did not reply. 10 minutes later, his mother, Evelyn, posted in the extended family Facebook group. She tagged everyone, complaining that a minor accident happened on the wedding day and I was now holding it over their heads, refusing to come back, and even sending them a bill. She lamented that her son was incredibly unlucky to be engaged to such a cold-blooded woman who acted like a debt collector. I stared at the post. Mia asked if I was going to reply. I said absolutely. I uploaded the first bank transfer receipt for the wedding venue, then the second, then the third, until the comment section went dead silent. Finally, I typed a response, stating the invoice was not a negotiation tactic. It was a cancellation of the engagement. A full minute of silence followed. Then, Julian's aunt chimed in, scolding me for being immature, saying nobody wanted the accident to happen, and that Julian was just acting out of panic. She accused me of overreacting. I did not reply to her. Instead, I uploaded my emergency room medical report. It clearly stated a left calf laceration requiring 7 stitches, lower back contusions, and a mild concussion requiring observation. The comments turned into a string of ellipses. Then, I uploaded Summer's ER triage sheet, which listed a superficial scrape on the back of the hand, emotional distress, and recommended rest. Mia laughed out loud beside me, noting the contrast was spectacular. Evelyn quickly deleted her original post, but I had already taken screenshots. She then commented that nobody could read medical jargon anyway, reiterating that Summer was frail and the shock was worse than physical injuries, and told me I should be the bigger person and stop being so petty. I stared at the words, "be the bigger person," and felt only disgust. Summer was 1 year younger than me, but from the day she entered my life, the entire Carter family expected me to yield to her. When she said she liked my premium bridal bouquet, Evelyn told me it was just a small wish and I could easily pick another one. When Summer wanted to ride in the SUV right behind the bridal limo, Julian agreed, saying she got carsick easily and he would feel better if she was close. When she claimed she was having a panic attack the night before the wedding, Julian stayed on the phone with her until 2 a.m., leaving me alone in the hotel to finalize the vendor timelines. Back then, I told myself not to be petty. Looking back, it wasn't that I was petty, it was that they were constantly pushing my boundaries. I uploaded the final wedding master schedule into the group chat, tagging Evelyn. I stated I was not Summer's babysitter, nor was I her caretaker. I pointed out that her seating assignment, the motorcade order, and her emergency medical kit had all been confirmed by me in advance. I added that I would be investigating exactly who requested the last-minute route change. That message brought Summer out of hiding. She commented for the first time, apologizing profusely, telling me not to blame Evelyn or Julian, and claiming she never meant to get me hurt. She attached a photo of her hand wrapped in gauze, angled perfectly to make a tiny bandage look like a massive injury. Immediately, a few relatives expressed their sympathy, saying both girls had it hard and telling me to stop being so aggressive. I offered no explanations. I simply uploaded the photo of my blood-soaked wedding dress. It was the picture Mia had taken at the ER entrance. In the photo, I was sitting in a wheelchair, the tool cut open, my calf wrapped in thick, blood-stained bandages, my face entirely devoid of color. The group chat went completely dead. After a while, a distant cousin who rarely spoke commented that my injury actually looked severe and asked if Julian really hadn't stayed with me. Nobody answered, because the truth was too ugly. Julian finally intervened, demanding we keep private matters off Facebook. I replied that his mother was the one who publicly accused me of running off with their money. Julian typed back that she was just anxious. I replied that I was anxious too when I was bleeding, but he was too busy carrying someone else. After sending that, I left the group. Mia clapped her hands in approval. My mother frowned, predicting they would not let this go easily. She was right. At 4 p.m., Evelyn showed up at the diner with 2 relatives, blocking the entrance. It was the dinner rush, and every booth was full. The moment Evelyn walked in, she started wailing. She yelled for everyone to hear that her son had an accident on his wedding day, and instead of sticking together, her future daughter-in-law was demanding money. She cried that her son was just trying to get married, not hire a debt collector. The customers all turned to stare. My mother stepped out from behind the counter, her expression furious. She warned Evelyn not to cause a scene in her establishment. Evelyn pointed a finger right at my mom, accusing her of raising a daughter who was trying to skin the Carter family alive just because the wedding fell through. She yelled that they had paid for the rehearsal dinner and the catering, yet I still wanted to steal the condo. I gripped the edge of my chair and stood up. A sharp pain shot up my leg, making me pause. Mia tried to help me, but I waved off her assistance. I walked step by step until I stood right in front of Evelyn. I stated loudly that she had indeed contributed $8,000 for the rehearsal dinner, but had taken $6,000 back the very next day to help Julian's cousin out of a jam. The remaining $2,000 barely covered the venue deposit. I asked if she wanted me to tape the bank statements to the diner's front window. Evelyn's face changed color as the customers began whispering. I continued, stating that I paid for the catering, the florist, and the limousines. I pointed out that the Carter family had only provided a few cases of wine, and even then, Evelyn had asked me for a reimbursement because the receipt had the wrong name on it. Mia immediately pulled the photocopied receipts from her folder and slammed them onto a table. The relatives with Evelyn tried to snatch them, but Mia slapped her hand down, warning them they would pay for anything they ruined. Evelyn raised her voice. asking why I was calculating everything so ruthlessly when we were supposed to be family. I looked her dead in the eye and said it was because we were no longer going to be family. The diner fell silent. Evelyn's fake crying expression froze on her face. She asked if I was truly breaking the engagement, mocking me by asking who would ever want a 28-year-old woman who got dumped on her wedding day. Suddenly, my mother grabbed a wet rag from a table and slammed it violently into a bus tub. She roared that her daughter was not some clearance item that needed a buyer. Evelyn jumped in shock. I was stunned too. My mom hated conflict. For years, she had silently endured Evelyn's thinly veiled insults about our financial status, always telling me that marriage involved two families, and she didn't want to make things hard for me. But now, she stood firmly in front of me, her voice trembling but refusing to back down an inch. She yelled at Evelyn, asking how she had the nerve to throw a tantrum in her diner when her son abandoned my bleeding daughter in her wedding dress. She demanded they pay back what they owed if they had any shame, or else she would drag them straight to the police precinct. A customer at the counter muttered loudly that the groom's family was absolutely delusional. Embarrassed and cornered, Evelyn pointed at me, warning me I would regret this. I calmly replied that my only regret was waiting until today to wake up. Evelyn stormed out. After she left, my mother turned to head back to the kitchen, but her hands were shaking violently. I held her arms. She looked down and wiped her tears, telling me she used to think that enduring the disrespect would eventually make things easier. But now she realized that some people just step harder the more you yield. I squeezed her hands and promised we would never yield again. That night, Julian came to the diner. He didn't come inside, just stood under the street lamp outside. When I walked out, he stared at the bandages on my leg, a flicker of panic finally crossing his eyes. He asked if it still hurt. I told him to get straight to the point. His Adam's apple bobbed as he apologized for his mother causing a scene. I told him she could apologize for herself. "Chloe," he started, asking if our 6 years of love really had to end like this. I looked at him. The streetlight stretched his shadow across the pavement. This was the man I had loved for 6 years. I knew about his sensitive stomach, his hatred for cilantro, and how he pinched the bridge of his nose when stressed. I also knew that every time he was about to defend Summer, he would start by calling my name, asking me to be the bigger person, reminding me that Summer had a hard life, and begging me not to make things difficult for him. Those words used to bind me like ropes. Now, the ropes were cut. I told him I wasn't the one causing a scene. They were just paying their debts. Julian closed his eyes and begged me not to bring up the condo, claiming his mother's health couldn't handle the stress. I laughed. Here we go again. I pointed out that whenever I mentioned my injuries, he brought up Summer. Whenever I mentioned money, he brought up his mother's health. I told him that everyone in his family was allowed to have struggles, but I was just expected to absorb it all. Julian's face turned pale. He tried to speak, but his phone rang. Summer's name flashed on the screen. He answered it instinctively. Summer's voice was broken by sobs, crying that her hand hurt. The doctor said it might scar, and she feared she would never play the piano again. Julian instantly grew tense, promising to be right there. Only after he hung up did he remember I was still standing in front of him. A flash of profound embarrassment crossed his eyes as he promised to talk to me later. I nodded and told him to go. He hesitated, unaccustomed to my calm response. I added that from today onward, he would never have to explain his visits to her again, because it was no longer my business. On the 4th day, I went back to my condo to retrieve my belongings. The apartment was a modest 2-bedroom in downtown Seattle. The down payment took 5 years of my savings, plus the money my mom got from selling an old property. At the time, Julian claimed his money was tied up in student loans and career training. I believed him, but the deed remained solely in my name. It was the only compromise I refused to make. His mother had been passive-aggressive about it for months, treating me like a thief guarding a treasure. Now I realized I absolutely had to be on guard. Mia accompanied me upstairs. As soon as I unlocked the door, an unfamiliar perfume hit my nose. I stopped. Mia smelled it too, and her face darkened. The master bedroom door was open. Summer was sitting at my vanity. She was wearing the white silk bridal robe I had bought specifically for the wedding morning prep photos. Her hair was down, she looked perfectly healthy, and she was trying on my earrings in the mirror. When she saw me, she scrambled to stand up in a panic, asking why I was there. I stared at the robe and reminded her it was my house. She blushed, instantly switching to a victimized expression, claiming Julian told her the place was empty, and since she couldn't sleep at the hospital, he offered it so she could rest. Mia exploded, asking how wearing my clothes and using my vanity counted as resting. Summer's eyes welled with tears, insisting she didn't know they were my things and that her clothes were dirty from the hospital, so she just grabbed something to lounge in. I walked past her and opened my closet. The protective bag holding my reception dress had been shoved into the corner. 3 of Summer's dresses were hanging there. Her pill bottles, hand lotion, and a pink water tumbler were sitting on my nightstand. This wasn't resting, this was moving in. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Summer reached out to stop me, asking what I was doing. I looked right at her and said I was documenting evidence of illegal trespassing and use of private property. Her face drained of color. She begged me not to use such harsh words, claiming she and Julian grew up together and he was just worried she had no one to take care of her. I asked if that was why he moved her into my marital home. She bit her lip and stayed quiet. Just then, Julian rushed in. Summer must have texted him. The moment he saw me taking pictures, his face darkened, demanding to know what I was doing. I pointed at the robe on Summer and told him to make her take it off. Julian frowned, accusing me of humiliating her while she was unwell. I stared at him, suddenly realizing how terrible my taste in men had been. He used this script so flawlessly. Anytime Summer inconvenienced someone, asking for basic respect back was framed as humiliating her. I told him taking my clothes without asking was called stealing. Summer started crying, claiming she didn't know and was just cold. Julian stepped in front of her, saying it was just a robe and he would pay me for it. I rattled off the prices. The designer robe was $380, the earrings $120, and the luxury bedding she slept on was $260. I told him to Venmo me right now. Julian was stunned. Mia burst out laughing. Summer was frozen. She didn't expect me to actually demand cash. Julian looked disgusted, asking when I became so nickel and dime about everything. I pulled up my Venmo QR code and said, "Since the day you carried her into the ambulance." He stared at me like I was a stranger. I didn't flinch. Eventually, he actually sent the money, maybe because he was embarrassed, or maybe because he was afraid I would keep taking photos. After confirming the transfer, I opened my suitcase and began packing my documents and valuables. Mia helped me gather the appliance warranties. I put the deed, purchase agreements, and remodeling invoices into my folder. Julian stood nearby, softening his voice, asking me not to make a fuss over the condo. He said Summer would leave in 2 days, and we could discuss everything once we set a new wedding date. I stopped what I was doing and asked if he seriously still thought I was just throwing a tantrum. He looked confused, asking if I wasn't. I smiled and said no. I pulled a piece of paper from my folder. It was a draft of a prenuptial agreement his mother had tried to get me to sign, which stipulated I would pay the mortgage while granting Julian 50% equity in my condo in the event of a divorce. I had refused to sign it back then. Now, it was proof of their scheming. I handed it to Julian, asking if his aunt had drafted it. Julian's face changed as he defended it, saying his mom just wanted family stability. I pointed out that his version of stability meant I bought the house, paid for the remodel, gave him half my equity, and let him move Summer in whenever he pleased. Julian firmly told me not to drag Summer into this. I retorted that she was literally standing right there. The room went silent. Summer stood awkwardly in the doorway, her face flushing red and white. I finished packing and zipped up my suitcase. As I walked past Summer, I stopped. She looked up, tears still in her eyes. I told her that if she wanted Julian, she could just take him. There was no need to fake illnesses, play the innocent victim, or wear my clothes. I told her she wasn't fragile, she was just greedy. Her tears spilled over, but Julian exploded, yelling that I had gone too far. He claimed Summer had always felt guilty toward me and demanded to know why I constantly assumed the worst of her. I took the velvet ring box from Mia. I opened it. The blood had been cleaned off and the diamond sat coldly on the cushion. I placed it on the coffee table and told him I was returning it. Julian's expression drastically shifted as he asked if I was serious. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled an eviction notice from my bag. I stated clearly that the condo was my premarital property, and they had 3 days to remove their belongings, while Summer needed to leave immediately. If not, I would have building security and my lawyer handle it. Julian stared at the paper, finally realizing this situation was completely out of his control. He begged me to talk. I told him we just did. He accused me of being merciless. I looked at him and said that when I was sitting in a bleeding wedding dress, watching the ambulance doors close, he was the one who forced me to be merciless. With that, I rolled my suitcase out the door. Summer began sobbing loudly behind me, but Julian did not chase after me. As the elevator doors closed, Mia asked if I was sad. I said yes. She was about to comfort me when I added, but I don't regret it. That evening, Summer posted on Instagram. It was a photo of her bandaged hand with a caption claiming misunderstandings were hard to clear up and hoping she wouldn't hate her anymore. Mutual friends immediately sent me screenshots. Some commenters praised her kindness, while others called me toxic for ruining a wedding day over an accident. I saved every screenshot into a folder on my laptop named Summer's Defamation Evidence. Mia asked if I was going to retaliate. I said there was no rush, because some people always end up exposing themselves. On the 7th day, I went to the hospital for a follow-up. My wound was healing well, though walking still hurt. When Dr. Miller was changing my dressing, he noticed me gritting my teeth and told me not to push myself if it hurt. I said I was used to it. The moment the words left my mouth, I paused. Doctor. Miller looked at me and quietly said I shouldn't get used to it anymore. His words were light, but they struck my chest like a small hammer. I took my paperwork and walked out. In the hallway, I ran into Summer. She was sitting in a wheelchair, being pushed by Julian. The bandage on her hand was even larger than before, wrapping almost halfway up her arm. Her makeup was incredibly pale, making her look like she had just left the ICU. Julian stopped in his tracks when he saw me. Summer spoke first, innocently asking if I was there for a checkup too. I ignored her and tried to walk past, but she suddenly reached out and grabbed my sleeve. She begged me not to blame Julian anymore, claiming he was just too worried about her, and that she had begged him to go back for me, but he was terrified she was in danger. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve and told her to let go. She recoiled as if I had burned her, immediately turning on the tears, apologizing and saying she didn't mean it. Julian frowned, scolding me because she was trying to apologize. I stated that I merely told her to let go of my sleeve. Summer shrank back, crying that she knew I hated her, but she wasn't the one who caused the crash and didn't expect me to get hurt. She loudly asked why I had to blame her for everything. People in the hallway started turning their heads. Her voice was pitched perfectly for an audience. I looked at her and asked if she thought crying quickly meant nobody would bother asking for the facts. Her face paled as she denied it. I pointed at her hand and asked exactly how severe her injury was. Julian stepped in, warning me I was crossing a line. I simply turned around and walked straight to the nurse's station where Dr. Miller was standing. I asked him if a patient's medical records could be disclosed if they consented. Doctor? Miller glanced at Summer and said absolutely, if she agreed. Summer's eyes darted around in panic. I nodded and said I would disclose mine first. I laid my medical file and follow-up report on a nearby counter for everyone to see. I announced my injuries: a left calf laceration with 7 stitches, lower back contusions, and a mild concussion. I told Summer that if she felt I was wronging her, she could show everyone her medical records too. The crowd of onlookers grew. Summer bit her lip, crying harder, claiming she wasn't as aggressive as me and just wanted to heal in peace. I told her healing was fine, but spreading rumors wasn't. Julian blocked my view of her, yelling that her hand might scar and asking if that wasn't enough. Dr. Miller suddenly chimed in. His clinical tone cut through the drama as he stated that superficial scrapes rarely impact mobility and just require regular bandage changes. Julian froze. Summer's face turned sheet white. Doctor? Miller continued, devoid of any emotion, stating that unless there was a secondary infection, the ER records confirmed it was purely a superficial epidermal scrape. The hallway went dead silent. The onlookers who had previously looked at Summer with pity now changed their expressions entirely. Mia, who had just arrived to pick me up, seized the moment. She loudly declared that a superficial scrape required a wheelchair, while 7 stitches had me walking on my own, sarcastically praising Summer's theatrics. Summer looked up at Julian through tear-filled eyes, asking if she was making things difficult for him and offering to stop her treatment. Julian immediately crouched down, telling her to stop talking nonsense. Watching them, I suddenly realized I felt absolutely no pain, not in my wound, and not in my heart. In the past, seeing him gently coax Summer would have made me jealous and insecure. Now, I just felt exhausted. I grabbed my files and walked away. Julian chased after me for a few steps, asking if I really had to humiliate Summer in public. I turned around and told him that even now, he only saw her humiliation, but still couldn't see my bleeding. He choked on his words. I added that I wasn't humiliating her. I was just letting the truth get some fresh air. When Mia helped me into her car, she pulled a stack of printed papers from her bag, announcing she had something even fresher. It was the limo dispatch records. The original route completely bypassed the construction zone. The route was changed at the last minute. The limo company stated someone in the bridal party group chat had dropped a new pin. I flipped through the printouts. They were chat logs provided by the limo driver, Gary. At 9:17 a.m. on the wedding day, Summer sent a message saying she left her medication bag at a florist on Pine Ridge Road and asked the motorcade to reroute because she was afraid she couldn't hold on. Julian replied, confirming the detour. Evelyn chimed in, saying Summer's health was the priority. Gary, the driver, had warned them the construction on Pine Ridge Road would cause a delay and potential hazards. Summer replied that it would only take a few minutes, adding she didn't want any emergencies ruining her best friend's big day. Mia scoffed, noting that her detour caused the ultimate emergency. I stared at the line where Summer claimed she didn't want to ruin my day, my fingers gripping the paper tightly. Mia told me Gary was willing to testify, stating he hadn't wanted to deviate, but because both the groom and his mother approved it, he had to comply. I asked if they ever retrieved the medication bag. Mia shook her head, stating the florist owner confirmed nobody ever came for any bag. I looked out the car window. Julian was pushing Summer out of the hospital doors. She leaned back in the wheelchair like a delicate flower ready to blow away in the wind. But she wasn't a flower, she was a knife. And Julian was the one who had personally handed that knife to me. When the insurance adjusters and our lawyers called us in for a deposition regarding the accident liability, Julian finally panicked. He called me 5 times. I didn't answer. On the 6th try, he texted me, begging me not to blow things out of proportion before liability was assigned, insisting Summer didn't do it on purpose. I replied that I only cared about the evidence. He asked to meet. I told him I would see him at the lawyer's office. The next morning, Mia and I arrived on time. Julian was waiting in the lobby. Summer was absent, but Evelyn was with him. As soon as she saw me, her face darkened, accusing me of trying to drive Julian to an early grave over an accident nobody wanted. I ignored her and took a seat. Julian looked at my leg and asked if it was better. I told him to stick to business. His face stiffened. The claims adjuster soon called us in. The accident was straightforward. After entering the construction zone, the lead car braked hard to avoid a barrier, causing a chain reaction rear-end collision. The bridal limo took the worst hit, which was how my leg got sliced by the crushed seat frame. The core issue was why the motorcade diverted. Gary, the driver, was present. He was an honest man in his 50s and kept wringing his hands nervously. He stated that the new route wasn't his idea, but the groom's party wanted to get a medication bag. He had warned them, but the groom insisted. Julian frowned, claiming he was just worried about Summer. Gary nodded, confirming Julian had said her health was the priority. The adjuster asked for the chat logs. Gary handed over the printouts. The messages were laid out on the desk. Summer asked for the detour. Julian agreed. Evelyn supported it, and the driver's warning was ignored. Evelyn immediately argued that Summer was just terrified of having a medical emergency during the wedding. I asked where the medication bag was. Evelyn choked. The adjuster looked at her. I handed over a written statement from the florist. It confirmed that on the wedding day, nobody came to pick up a bag, nor had Summer ever left one there. Julian read the paper, the color draining from his face. Evelyn quickly changed her tune, suggesting Summer simply remembered the wrong location. I stared at her, pointing out that a memory lapse rerouted an entire motorcade, caused an accident, resulted in her getting a scrape, while I got 7 stitches, and she thought that was a sufficient excuse. Furious, Evelyn demanded to know what I wanted, asking if I expected Summer to kneel and beg. I told her no. I expected them to be legally liable for the damages. Julian looked up in shock, asking if I was suing Summer. I looked right back at him and said he was getting sued too. The room went silent. Julian looked as if he had been slapped. I explained that he was the one who approved the detour, and he failed his duty of care after the accident. Even though we hadn't signed the marriage certificate yet, he was the primary organizer of the wedding day. The dispatch, the route confirmation, and the emergency response were all his responsibilities. Evelyn jumped out of her chair, screaming that I was insane for suing my own fiancé. I corrected her. Ex-fiancé. Julian's face was grim as he asked if I really had to take it this far. I calmly told him they were the ones who pushed me here step by step. He gripped the edge of the table, admitting he handled things poorly that day, but claimed that if Summer had truly died of a heart attack, he would have regretted it for life. I looked at him and asked, "What about me?" He fell silent. He couldn't answer that question, because in his hierarchy of priorities, Summer's hypothetical risks always outranked my actual suffering. Leaving the office building, Julian followed me out, begging me not to take it to court, offering to cancel the wedding and pay compensation privately. He said his mother cared about her reputation and couldn't handle the public shame. I laughed, asking if his mother's reputation was more important than my physical injuries. He claimed that wasn't what he meant. I looked at him and said that regardless of what he meant, the result was always the same. Julian's eyes were bloodshot as he accused me of no longer being the understanding woman he knew. I agreed, stating that I was done being his doormat. I got in the car and left. That afternoon, Julian sent me $5,000 on Venmo with a note calling it emotional compensation. I refunded it immediately and resent the itemized invoice, telling him it wasn't about my emotions, it was about his legal liability, and he needed to pay the exact amounts listed. He didn't reply. That night, Evelyn went on another tirade, this time in the condo building's HOA Facebook group. She posted a photo of me, claiming I was a runaway bride who was now trying to evict her fiancé's family from their shared home. She ranted about how modern women were gold diggers who put only their names on the deed and treated their in-laws like trash. When I saw it, the neighbors were already gossiping. Some called me heartless, while others pitied the Carter family. I didn't immediately reply. First, I contacted the property manager to verify my status as the sole owner. Then I uploaded 3 documents to the Facebook group: the property deed, the bank transfer record of my down payment, and the formal eviction notice. I added a single sentence stating this is my premarital, personal property, the Carter family contributed $0, holds no equity, and has no lease agreement, so please cease spreading defamatory information, or I will pursue legal action. The HOA group went silent. Minutes later, a neighbor chimed in, asking why the Carter family shouldn't move out if it was solely the woman's house. Another neighbor mentioned they had heard the groom carried another woman away from a car crash on the wedding day. The tide of public opinion turned instantly. Evelyn quickly deleted her post, but I had already saved the screenshots. Mia commented that I was becoming incredibly ruthless. I looked at the screen and softly replied that it wasn't ruthlessness, it was the realization that I could not take a single step back. I used to think compromising bought understanding, but I finally learned that some people treat your compromises as permission to keep hurting you. The Carter family decided to throw a postponed reception anyway. I found out when the venue manager called me. He nervously informed me that Julian's family had converted our booking into a damage control family dinner for this Saturday, scaling down the events but keeping the catering, and asked if the final balance would still be billed to my card. I laughed into the phone and asked who authorized a delay. The manager was confused, saying Julian's mother told them I was just throwing a tantrum and would return soon. I clearly stated the wedding was canceled, the final payment would not be made, the deposit would be forfeited per the contract, and they were on their own. The manager was panicked because the Carters had already invited their guests. I told him that was their problem. Shortly after, Julian texted me, asking me to come to the venue on Saturday to clear the air in front of the relatives and negotiate whatever compensation I wanted. I replied that I would be there. Mia was shocked, asking if I wasn't afraid they would gang up on me. I said I was only afraid they wouldn't all be in one room. On Saturday, I wore a sleek black dress. My leg was healing, so I walked slowly but stood perfectly straight. Mia came with me, alongside Jessica Hayes, the attorney my mother had hired. Jessica was sharp, practical, and after reviewing my evidence, had simply told me I had a bulletproof case as long as I didn't get soft. She strongly advised against me crashing their dinner, but she came along to ensure I didn't cross any legal lines regarding defamation. Inside the banquet hall, the floral arches and our engagement photos were still on display. My face in one of the photos was partially obscured by a wilting bouquet. As soon as I walked in, dozens of eyes snapped toward me. Evelyn rushed over, forcing a fake smile but whispering a threat, telling me not to speak out of turn and to give Julian an easy way out so I wouldn't ruin my own future. I looked at her and said I was there to tear down the entire stage. Her smile vanished. Julian walked over from the podium. He saw my black dress and frowned, criticizing my outfit choice for such an occasion. I told him it was perfectly fitting. Julian looked frustrated, begging me to stop making a scene. I glanced at the red roses around the room and reminded him that they were the ones who wanted to clear the air. Summer was also there. She was wearing a pale blue dress and sitting in the front row, a small bandage still on her hand. Seeing me, she stood up, claiming she came to personally apologize. I told her I didn't need an apology, just cash. Her face froze. A few relatives muttered their disapproval, shocked that a girl could be so obsessed with money and give no grace to the groom. I walked up to the podium. The MC stepped aside in confusion. I grabbed the microphone. Julian rushed forward to stop me, but I addressed the crowd, thanking everyone for being there to serve as witnesses. The hall quieted down. I placed the velvet ring box on the podium, alongside a thick ledger. I announced that this was not a family dinner, it was a public debt settlement. The crowd gasped. Evelyn turned pale and charged the stage to grab the mic. Jessica stepped in her path, professionally advising her to mind her behavior. Trembling with rage, Evelyn demanded to know who Jessica was. When Jessica introduced herself as my legal counsel, the room erupted into whispers. I opened the ledger. Page 1. Wedding expenses. I read off the venue deposit of $15,000, the florist's $5,000, the limo company's $3,000, and the photographer's $2,500, all paid from my accounts. As I read each item, Mia projected the corresponding bank statements onto the massive banquet screen. It wasn't hearsay, it was hard, undeniable contractual proof. Evelyn tried to scream over me, but the glaring eyes of her own relatives silenced her. I turned to page 2. The condo. Down payment $120,000, remodeling $35,000, furniture $20,000. I announced that the Carter family's financial contribution was exactly $0. The crowd gasped collectively. The relatives who had called me a gold digger lowered their heads in shame. Julian was pale as a ghost, begging me to stop reading. I looked at him and asked if this wasn't what they meant by clearing the air. His voice cracked as he said he didn't want to humiliate me. I laughed, pointing out that they had been humiliating me for years. I moved to the next page, detailing the $18,000 I had spent on Evelyn's medical bills and insurance premiums over 2 years. I reminded Evelyn that she used to call this family care, but since she had publicly accused me of stealing their money, I required it all back under unjust enrichment. Evelyn screamed that I was lying and that those were voluntary gifts. I agreed they were voluntary back then, but her defamation in the Facebook groups required a public accounting of who was actually leeching off whom. The relatives began muttering that the Carter family was completely out of line. Summer suddenly stood up, clutching her chest, crying that while she didn't understand finances, Julian truly loved me, and I couldn't destroy 6 years of love because of her. I looked at her and asked if she understood how to change a limo route. Her tears stopped instantly. I projected the chat logs and the route maps onto the screen. The evidence was undeniable. Summer asked for the detour for a fake medication bag. Julian and Evelyn approved it against the driver's warnings, and the florist confirmed no bag existed. The banquet hall exploded. Summer was ghostly white, stammering that she was just nervous and remembered wrong. I asked if her bad memory was the reason she didn't tell Julian I was bleeding in the car when he carried her into the ambulance. She cried that she was too scared to notice. I nodded, noting that she was allowed to be scared, Julian was allowed to panic, and they were allowed to choose each other, while I was just expected to be strong. Julian stood frozen below the stage, his eyes red, calling out to me, "Chloe." I opened the ring box. I told him I had taken this ring off my bleeding hand on the side of the road, and now I was giving it back. I declared our engagement officially terminated, demanded they vacate my condo, and stated the financial and legal liabilities would be pursued through the courts. I told him he would never have to force me to understand Summer or his mother ever again, because I was no longer his bride. The banquet hall was so quiet you could hear the AC humming. Julian stood there, completely drained of life, unable to reach for the ring. Evelyn finally snapped out of it, rushing the stage to curse me for ruining their family's reputation. I held the mic closer to her face and offered to read her defamatory Facebook comments aloud. She shut her mouth. Her own relatives pulled her back, whispering that their family was clearly in the wrong. Evelyn was stunned. Her tears and victim playing had always worked before, usually painting Julian as my hostage. But with the receipts, invoices, and chat logs projected on the wall, the truth was glaring. Summer suddenly grabbed her chest again, crying to Julian that she felt sick. Julian instinctively took a step toward her. I saw it. Everyone saw it. Julian realized it too and froze, his face growing paler. Summer's tears cascaded as she insisted she wasn't faking it. Mia laughed into the microphone, advising Summer to walk next door to the urgent care clinic instead of asking Julian to carry her, lest everyone get the wrong idea. The crowd chuckled uncomfortably. Summer flushed deep red, looking at Julian and asking if she shouldn't have come. This time, Julian didn't comfort her. He stared at the route map on the screen and asked her about the medication bag. Summer stammered that she must have remembered wrong. Julian's voice was low as he noted she never forgot her medication before. Summer panicked, asking if he was doubting her after all their years of friendship. It was her classic manipulation tactic, but with the entire room staring at the evidence, Julian couldn't pretend to be blind anymore. I nodded at Mia, who pulled up one final screenshot on the projector. It was from the bridal party group chat. The night before the wedding, Summer had accidentally sent a message to the wrong group before quickly deleting it. The wedding coordinator had screenshotted it because it felt off and sent it to Mia. The message read that as long as Julian chose to check on her first during an emergency, she'd finally realize who is more important. When that message hit the massive screen, Summer completely froze. Julian stared at the words, his lips trembling as he asked her if she really sent that. Summer was hyperventilating, claiming she was just emotional and speaking nonsense. I told her it wasn't nonsense, it was a test. And she had tested him for years, testing if he would change the bouquet, stay up late with her, reroute the motorcade, or save her first in a crash. And every single time he chose her. Summer sobbed and shook her head. But I looked at Julian and delivered the final blow. It wasn't just her fault. She set the traps, but he willingly walked into them. He indulged her tears and demanded my maturity in exchange. I told Julian he wasn't tricked. He was a willing participant. All the color left Julian's face. He tried to speak, but no words came out. The crowd murmured that this wasn't just a childhood friendship. It was intentional sabotage, and the bride was absolutely right to walk away. Evelyn collapsed into a chair, trembling. For the first time, her tantrums were useless. Jessica stepped up to the mic, officially serving them notice for the eviction, the debt collection, and the personal injury lawsuit, warning them against any further defamation. Julian didn't look at the legal papers. He looked at me, his voice breaking, asking what would happen if he admitted he was wrong. I smiled and said he would face the consequences. He begged for a second chance. Summer looked up as if she had been stabbed. Evelyn cried out his name. I looked at Julian. A month ago I might have cried. A week ago I might have agonized over our 6 years together. But now, I just felt disconnected. He wasn't begging because he loved me. He was begging because he had lost control of his comfortable life where I paid the bills, managed his mother, and tolerated his emotional affair with Summer. I told him his regret was not my new beginning. He stood there with red eyes as I left the stage. As I reached the doors, Summer yelled my name. Her makeup was ruined, and her eyes were full of venom. She spat that I had forced her into a corner, but Julian would never truly let her go. I didn't even stop walking as I told her she could keep him, because I didn't want him anymore. I pushed open the banquet doors and walked out into the bright sunlight, leaving the red carpet behind, and I never looked back. Following the banquet, the Carter family descended into chaos. Evelyn tried to play the victim in the family Facebook group again, only for her own relatives to tell her to just pay me back. She tried posting a long rant on Facebook about modern women being greedy, but the comments immediately asked if her family had contributed a single dime to the house. She deleted the post. Julian started texting me constantly, promising to move out, promising to handle Summer, and begging to talk. I ignored every single one. I had finally learned that silence was the best response. In the past, whenever he asked to talk, I would rush over, listen to his hour-long excuses, and end up being the one to compromise. Not anymore. The property manager confirmed the Carters were moving out. Evelyn even tried to steal the refrigerator and washer I had bought, but building security stopped her based on the inventory list I provided. She called to curse me out over a fridge. I simply reminded her it was my property, and hung up. That afternoon, she showed up at the diner again, this time with Julian's aunt, trying to play good cop with my mother. Evelyn cried that the kids were just fighting and asked my mom to intervene, claiming my reputation would be ruined if the wedding was called off. I walked out of the back room and told her my mom didn't need to intervene. Evelyn forced a smile, looking at my mom for backup. My mother put down her towel and agreed that she used to think women needed to compromise for a good marriage. Evelyn's eyes lit up, but my mom continued, stating that was exactly why she had tolerated Evelyn's snobbery, the financial abuse, and the disrespect. But she drew the line at her daughter bleeding in a wedding dress while the groom carried another woman away. My mom stated firmly that Evelyn wasn't there to make peace. She was there because she realized I could no longer be bullied. Julian's aunt tried to smooth things over, but my mom shut her down, declaring that since there was no wedding, we weren't family. Evelyn was furious. But my mom pulled out her phone and threatened to call the cops for harassment and sue for business disruption. Evelyn was stunned. I smiled at my mom. She had learned my strategy of keeping receipts. Evelyn stormed out, yelling that Julian would never take me back. I told her that was exactly what I was praying for. My mom sat down, her legs trembling slightly from the adrenaline. I hugged her. She told me she used to worry about me being a laughingstock, but now she knew that marrying into that family would have been a lifetime of misery. She made me promise to live a good life. I promised her I would. That night, I finalized everything with Jessica. We proceeded with the eviction, the debt collection, and the personal injury and defamation lawsuit. I refused mediation unless it included a written apology, full financial restitution, and immediate eviction. Jessica said it might take time, but our evidence was airtight. During the formal mediation, Julian looked exhausted, his shirt wrinkled and unshaven. Evelyn was sullen. Summer was there too. No wheelchair, just a small band-aid on her hand. She kept trying to hide her hand in her sleeve. The mediator went item by item. Evelyn complained about the appliances, but Jessica shut her down with the security logs. When it came to the wedding costs, Evelyn argued they shouldn't pay. I pointed out the cancellation was entirely due to Julian's abandonment and their subsequent harassment. Julian stared at his lap. When we reached the accident liability, Summer cried that she was just nervous. I reminded her of the route map, the fake medication bag, and her silence while I bled. Mia and Gary the driver gave their statements, completely dismantling her victim narrative. Julian finally looked up, his eyes devastated, and apologized to me. I told him he should have said that at the crash site. Evelyn tried to scold him for giving in, but Julian snapped at his mother to shut up. It was the first time he had ever silenced her. In the past, it might have given me a thrill. Now, it was just too little, too late. The mediation ended with a binding agreement. The keys were returned. Evelyn posted a formal, lawyer-approved apology in all groups. Summer was held partially liable for the crash damages, and Julian took on the bulk of the financial restitution, payable in 2 installments. When signing, Summer cried, asking Julian if he was really making her pay. Julian looked at her with a complex, weary expression, telling her she was responsible. Summer gasped, using her favorite line, telling him he used to never be like this. I laughed out loud. Julian looked at me. I noted that she also thought he had changed. I packed up my documents and left. Julian chased me down to the lobby, promising to pay the money, promising to stay away from Summer, and asking if I really didn't care anymore. I looked at the wind blowing outside and told him that my care had died on the day of the crash. He asked if we could start over with a new wedding. I didn't look back as I told him I didn't need a wedding. I needed someone who would walk toward me when I was bleeding, and that person would never be him. A few days later, I went to the hotel to sign the final refund paperwork for the catering. The lobby was empty, the floral arch dismantled. The manager apologized for the hassle. I told him it wasn't his fault. Julian walked out of the banquet hall holding the ring box. He had been waiting for me. He told me that on the day of the wedding, he genuinely wanted to spend his life with me. I didn't reply. He said he was just so used to taking care of Summer because she had no one else, and he forgot that I needed him too. I corrected him, stating he didn't forget, he just never prioritized me. He admitted that when he carried Summer to the ambulance, he didn't realize how badly I was hurt, assuming I could handle it. I smiled and said Dr. Miller was right. The wedding should have been a funeral, burying our relationship. Julian asked if he could ever win me back. I said no, because this wasn't a one-time mistake, it was 6 years of choices. He handed me the final signed property release forms. I took them and walked out into the sun. My mom was waiting by the curb in her old station wagon, waving at me and asking what I wanted for dinner. I smiled and said meatloaf. I got in the car. A month later, the stitches were fully healed, leaving only a faint pink scar. Dr. Miller told me it would fade, but never disappear completely. I said that was fine. It was a good reminder not to endure things until I bled. Outside the hospital, Julian was standing there. He looked thin. He said he wasn't stalking me, just picking up some papers. He told me he had cut off all contact with Summer. I told him he didn't need to report to me. He asked if I would ever forgive him. I watched a young couple walk by, the boy carrying the girl's bag and matching her slow pace. I turned to Julian and said I could stop hating him, but I would never want him again. The light in his eyes vanished. I walked past him, and this time, he didn't follow. Back at the diner, My mom had put up a new sign, Laura and Chloe's Diner. I sat at the counter, pulling out a piece of clean lace I had salvaged from my ruined wedding dress. I pasted it into the first page of a new journal. Mia asked what I was writing. I said it was a new ledger. I wrote down the date and a single note. From today on, I will never confuse being a victim with being understanding. My phone had no messages from Julian. My bank account showed the final settlement transfer had cleared. I closed the journal, finally free.